Hello students, welcome back to your computer networks lab. So in today's session we will be seeing about your experiment number 9. Again, experiment number 9 belongs to your part B, that is where the implementation is done on Java. So let us see what experiment number 9 has in store. So the problem statement goes like this. So it tells you, using a TCP/IP socket, write a client server program to make the client send a file name and to make the server send back the content of the requested file if present. So first thing, what is the requirement of the program after looking into the problem statement? We need a file to be present in the system, and that file should have at least a line of content. So now here it tells a client is going to send the file name and the server is going to extract the content from that file name and return the content to the client. Now let us address to the terminologies and let us see what is socket programming and how it all happens. Now talking about your client and server. So what is a client? What is a server? Client is a program or a system which could send request, and server is a program or a system that responds to the client request. The client could request for a particular data, it could request for a information or a service. The client would respond accordingly. We can have multiple clients but a single server. It follows the master slave architecture as well. Now just to give you an example, and again this is an illustrative example happen in reality, just for your understanding. Now let me say there is a single server. Let me say it is a Google server, and there are multiple clients or user. One client or user may be requesting for the application of mailing service. Another client could be requesting for a Google Drive service. Another client could be requesting for the photo service. The other client could request for the block service. So based on the client request, the server would respond accordingly to that particular service data or the information. Now let us see what is about the socket programming. What is a socket? A socket is something that establishes a connection. Now if I have to, let me put it in simple layman terms. I think you would have seen that electrical socket that is there. So when I plug in a device to that electric socket, I am able to establish, the electricity flows and then it goes on. Similarly, like that, here we need that socket that provides a way of connecting two nodes in a network. This allows two nodes, and here being very specific, it could be your client and the server. So it establishes a connection between these two nodes and it allows the nodes to communicate. So it can be reading and writing via this socket connection. Now how is the procedure? How is the connection established? What are the steps that takes to establish a connection? let us take a look. Now we have the client and we have the server. So the client and the server would be running on different systems. So the client and the server is going to connect a socket, and then now the server creates a socket, and then it is going to bind to that socket. So the socket is created by a port number, so the server is going to bind to that socket. Now the server is going to run a listen API where it is going to go to a waiting mode. Now why is that it has to wait? Now what is the job of the server? The job of the server is to serve the client. Now until the client does not request, there is nothing the server has to do. The server will just remain idle. So it goes to the listening mode, and in the listening mode is where it is going to establish a connection. It is going to get a connection request from the it wasn't visible, let me just do it again. So during the listen mode, it gets a connection request from the client. So once it gets the connection request, if it is an authenticated client, it accepts the connection. Once the connection is being accepted, there is a connection established between the client and the server. Now the client and the server is ready to exchange the data. So it could read or write the data. That is, the client could request for some data, the server would send some data, or the server could ask for something and the client could reply to it. So the sending and receiving of the data or the message can be done between the client and the server. Finally, each of it is going to close the connection and terminate the connection that was established. So this is the way it establishes the connection, or this is the process what happens between the client and the server. So both of it establishes a socket, then the server binds the port of that port number with the socket. It runs a listen where it is waiting for the client to send a request, and once it sends a request, it is accepted and the connection is established between the client and the server. Finally, it closes the connection. Now let us see how is it done programmatically. So we have Java.NET package that allows you to implement the socket program. So you have a socket class that is a part of your Java.NET package. We have two common protocols that is used. You will be studying as a part of your curriculum as well. So one is the connection oriented protocol and the other one is a connection less protocol. So a connection oriented protocol is your TCP, which stands for Transmission Control Protocol. It is connection oriented and a reliable communication where the transmission is guaranteed. The other one you have is your UDP, which is a connectionless protocol, which stands for User Datagram Protocol. So we also call it as unreliable and there could be data loss. You have another experiment which demonstrates your UDP protocol as well. Now let us see how do we establish the connection. What are the other APIs that is used in your program? So to establish a connection using your socket, you need two information. One is the IP address and the other one is the TCP port. So here it is a demonstration that we are doing. So we will be using some of the generic IP addresses and the port numbers. So this is the way, or this is the method or API that is used to open a socket. So socket is a class. You can see the difference here. It is a capital S and I am creating an object. My object name is also a socket and I am passing two parameters. So my first parameter is the IP address. So this is the IP address of local host. And then I have the port number. This is the TCP port number. We could be using any number between 0 to 65535. So here I have used 5000 and I think in your program we have used 4000. So you can be using any port number, but make sure it is the same port number that you use on the client and the server. So as we saw in the illustration or the illustrative diagram that we saw few minutes earlier, so if I divide the whole thing into three phases, so the first phase I am trying to connect, the second phase I am trying to communicate, and in the third phase I would be closing the connection. So again here we communicate over the socket connection using these streams of input and output. So what are the input stream and output stream and what is your API? You will see it further. So as I told you, once you have completed the communication between the nodes, or to be specific between the client and the server, you will be explicitly terminating the socket connection. Now let us see the APIs that is used. So the first API we have is the server socket, and the argument that it takes is the port number. So this particular API acts as a binding, where we saw to the bind function. You have an exclusive bind API also, but we will see when it is used. Now the purpose of this particular method or API is to bind the port number that you specified with the socket that is created. So we have seen in the everything that we talk about will be referring to the illustrative diagram that we saw. So you saw there, once the socket is created, you're going to bind the socket with the specified port number. So this method or API is going to perform that. Now there are other exclusive APIs to bind as well. So when do we use the bind? If the socket port number is not specified when we are creating, that is to the previous when we saw. See, in this example we are specifying the IP address and the port number. Here if I am calling an empty, default constructor, that is if I am not passing anything, if I just create a socket object with empty parenthesis, if this was my statement, that is when I will be using my API bind and connect, where I will be exclusively mentioning it. So you can see here. So if I have not specified it, then I would be using my bind, that is going to specify the server and the port number and the server address as well. And the other API that you have is accept. Now this is going to accept the connection, so it is waiting for the client. Now this acts as a blocking API where it has blocked the server until there is a client trying to connect to the server. So whenever the client executes, when I say it is blocking, it is not allowing to do any other operation. That is, in your program, in the server program, if there is an accept, it stops there, the execution stops there, and it is waiting for an external client to send a request. So it waits for the client to send a request. This accept can also be time bound. You can set a timeout, that is for how long the server has to wait for the incoming client. So as we have addressed earlier, this is used to accept the request that is coming from the client. The other one we have is the connect. Again, this is used only when we are using an empty, when we are calling a default constructor. That is, at the time of the creation of the socket at the client side, if at the time of the creation of the socket at the client side, if the API and the port is not mentioned, then we will be using the connect, which specifies the host address and it is able to initiate the connect. The next API that we have is about the input stream and the output stream. Now, as I have shown you and I have told, once the connection is established between the client and the server, now the data has to be exchanged. So we have the input stream where the client or the server may call it, where it is going to input the data, and we have the output stream where the server or the client could be responding to that, or it could be outputting its data, and each one is connected. I mean, it is a bidirectional. So we have input stream that is connected to the output stream and the output stream that is connected to the input stream, which is in turn exchanging between the client and the server. Now the input stream is connected to the output stream. That is, when the client calls the input stream, it is connected to the output stream of the server. Now if the server calls the output stream, it is connected to the input stream of the client. So that is how the data exchange happen, and this is one of the most important API that will be used in your program as well. The last one we have is to close. As we have seen the last thing even in the diagram, and when I told about the 3 phases, so we will have to explicitly close the socket connection that was created. So we call the close API, so that will close the socket. So this explicitly is going to discard the connection that was established between the client and the server. Let us take a quick walkthrough to your program. So there are some things that you will have to remember here when you're programming. You will have to create 2 separate files. This program is not a single file. You will be creating 2 separate Java files. One is for the client and the other one is for the server. Now in reality we have the client program that is running on a different system, and we have the server program that is running on a different system. But here, for the purpose of demonstration, we have both of it that will run on the same system, but you will have to execute your program simultaneously. So to the end of your program, I will tell you how is that you can be doing it simultaneously. So to remember, you will have to create two files. One is the client program and the other one is your server program, and you have to run the client and the server program simultaneously on the same system. So as we have seen earlier, so what does the program tell? The client is going to send the file name and the server is going to respond with the content in the file. As I have told it to you earlier, you will need import java.net. So this is a package that enable use to do the socket programming, because it has the socket class defined in this particular package. Now as we have seen, so this is the client side program. So in the client side program, it has to, what is the role in the client side program? What are we supposed to program here? We are supposed to send a file name and we are supposed to receive the content from the server. So to do that, we will have to establish the socket. So here I am using the socket class and I am using the socks as the object here. I am specifying my IP address and my port number. I have shown it to you even in the example that we discussed. So this is the generic IP address that we will be using, and here I am using the port number to be 4000. So because I have specified it here, I need not again explicitly call my connect. So I can specify it here and this does my job. So I need not again call the connect API. So here if I have not specified, so here if I had given an empty parenthesis and I called a default constructor, probably then I had to again call the connect API. So we will be asking the user to enter the file name. So when you are programming, please make sure that you already have a file with a text file with at least a line of data. The other add-on that I can tell to this program is, again you can write another if statement here where you can check if the file exists or not. So if a user enters the wrong file name, or if the user enters a file name that does not exist, you can make a small check here, which is not a part of it here. I'm just giving you an add-on which you can do it. So again you're taking the file name from the user and you're sending that file name. See, you can notice here you have the output stream. So whenever you send any data, you use the output stream. Whenever you receive any data, you use the input stream. So you send that file name using the output stream to the server. And here I need not, I think you have already known what is your print writer for. So this is just used to print it again. I mean, it is used to put up the file name that you have entered onto the screen. Now, so the first job of the client is done. So it is given the file name, it is requested for that particular file name. Now whatever is being in the output stream, I told you the output stream is now connected, has an input stream to the server. Now whatever you have specified has an output here, this will be the input to the server. Now again the server is going to output the content that will again be the input to the client. Now again from the input stream it is going to receive the data. And again I think you have already studied about your buffered reader as well. So just to specify, it is just reading the it is used to read the buffer of data. So here in the input stream we have the content that is available. So we will be reading that line by line until it is null, until it is the end. And the same thing is displayed on the screen using the print statement. So the job of the client is done, where it is sent the request using the output stream, it has received the content using the input stream, and it is received it, and the same thing is given to the user by the buffered read and your print statement. And finally we close the connection. So the three phases are seen. We establish the connection, we send and receive the message, and finally we close. Now the next thing we have on the server side. So as I told you when I started the explanation, you should be creating two files. So in one file you have put up your client side program. On the server side we have the server socket class, where you create an object servsocs. So here again you're creating an object by passing the port number. We have already discussed what is the purpose of server socket. So here you're it is bound to that. On the server side you create a socket, and that the server will be bound to that particular socket, to that particular port number. Now it tells the user that the server is ready for the connection. Now the server calls the accept. Now the accept blocks the server until it gets a connection request from the client, or until the client is trying to bind to the port number 4000. So I told you both of this should be run in parallel. So once even the client starts, you can see using the same port number the client is requesting for the connection when it is creating a socket. So eventually the client and the server will establish the connection. As I told you earlier as well, if this was an empty parenthesis, then we need an exclusive API, that is the bind API, which is going to bind the server to particular port number and the address. So here we need not require an additional API bind, and in the client side, because you have specified during the creation of the socket, you have specified the API and the port number, you don't need an additional API connect. So now you can see here, I told it to you when I had explained your client side. So whatever was the output stream of the client, where it was sending the file name, becomes the input stream in the server. Now you in the input stream, where the server is able to get the file name. Again, once it gets the file name, the server is going to outstream the content of that particular file. So we would be reading the file. Now we are opening the file as well to read the content, and it is we read the content of the file line by line, and buffer reader, as I've told it to you, it is used to read to a buffered content. So again here we would be reading the content line by line, and this println is going to display it for the user as well, and then finally we are closing the connection, that is the network connection. It is a simple program, but the only thing is you have to take care of the execution. Let me discuss about how do you execute the program. So if you are executing your program on a Linux platform, that is if you have a Fedora or a Ubuntu on your system, so you can open two terminals, and one terminal you will run the client program, and on the other terminal you will run the server program. Now most of them, if you don't have your Linux OS, if you have your Windows and you're running using any of the IDEs like Eclipse, you have a provision there to open multiple tabs. So you will be opening two tabs there. So on one tab you will be executing your client program, and on the other tab you will be executing your server program. So this is where both the programs will be running simultaneously, and one will be acting as a server and one will be acting as a client. And this is how where you can be demonstrating how the communication happens between the client and the server. Thank you, students.